Hello and welcome to The Mirror. My name is Rick Novy. I'm the host, and this is episode number 3. My special guest today is Tobias Buckell. He's a relatively young author. He's got a series of books in a science fiction universe. We'll talk about that a little bit with him, as well as a few other aspects of his life and what he's doing. Welcome, Tobias, and thank you for coming on The Mirror.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me on the show.
Your first novel, as strange as it sounds, is something of a steampunk space opera. And you've written a few more books in that same universe. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, when I first set out to create the universe, I wanted to create something that was open and large enough that I could go ahead and sort of set any number of stories that I wanted to tell in it in a sort of loose framework that would work really easily. So what I did was created a universe set in a future with lots of worlds all connected by wormholes in orbit, and that let me kind of create lots of different systems, lots of different political areas that I could explore and play with. And the universe is sort of a riff on post-colonialism in that it's initially sort of ruled by a group of aliens who are very colonialist in their outlook, and sort of dominate the so-called lesser races, which include humanity. And so it sort of gives me a vehicle to look at lots of different ways in which these sort of politics of colonialism play out. You know, a lot of playing with Rudyard Kipling's, white man's burden, but in this case the aliens sort of view it as the alien's burden, and humanity and lesser races are sort of duking it out for their own free will, duking it out for their own, to be able to control their own futures, and using the arguments made by a lot of first world countries to third world countries for a long time against humanity in the novels. And that's sort of the very vast political backdrop. I'm a bit of a world builder, science fiction world builder first and foremost, so that's just the stuff I weave in and throughout it to give it more resonance and explore some deeper stuff. First and foremost, I have lots of multiple world and the connected wormholes so that I have some wild settings that I get to blow stuff up on and have a lot of fun with.
You were born in the Caribbean, and that's heavily influenced your work. You've also been fairly outspoken about minority representation in the science fiction and fantasy in general. Do you think you've made an impact in this area, and have you seen any resistance to change?
Well, I don't think I'm a very outspoken proponent of minority representation. I mean, the fact is I've posted about it 4 times on my weblog, and that has turned me into, according to other people, an outspoken and loud outspoken sort of person about this. To me, it's just a no-duh, which is the fact is that there are not a lot of minorities in science fiction, and there's not a lot of minority representation in characters. And it's just a very simple math equation, which is that out of 1,000 or so writers who are involved in science fiction, not to mention the hundreds more on the periphery, mostly pretty much all of them are white. And if you just look at the way in which demographics lays down in the US, you would expect out of 1,000 writers to have probably a couple hundred minority writers, and we don't even have that inside of science fiction. So that indicates that there's something problematic going on, and there's some sort of failure going on somewhere. And to me, that's not being an outspoken proponent of it, it's just pointing out a glaring flaw. It's sort of pointing out, you're not an outspoken proponent of the fire department when you point out a house is on fire and it's burning down. You're just someone who's pointing out the obvious. As for what needs to be fixed, I've never really given a sort of set number of steps about what needs to be done, other than everyone needs to at least engage with the problem on their own and think about it. Denying that there is a problem is pretty stupid, and that's done a lot. implying that I'm forcing one sort of solution or trying to bring quotas is another really dumb argument, because I've never particularly done that. And so it's one of those things where it's like, it's interesting to me that all I have to do is write about it 4 times out of, I think I have a couple thousand blog entries from 1998 to now. Write about this 4 times and suddenly I'm a loud proponent of something. I think that says more about the people who are on the other side of this debate than it says about me. And that there's a tremendous wall of not wanting to change that some people have. They think everything's just fine. There's also a minority bias among people, which is that if you have a room of about 100 white people and there are a handful of minorities in there, they will usually think that there are a lot of minorities in there because they notice a handful more. So a lot of people still need to be educated that we just really don't have that many minority writers or minority characters inside of science fiction. I think it's damaging to science fiction because fundamentally, if you just, again, simple math, if you look at the demographics of the world as it is today, that means that we are making our field feel hostile to new readers, particularly new readers who are way more cosmopolitan in this day and age. And particularly as we move forward, it's going to make our fiction extremely non-pertinent to the entire world as we move forward to a future where we're more global, where even in the US things are way more cosmopolitan than they will be now. If you look at demographics of 2030 and 2040, the demographics of the US are probably going to change a bit. So just looking at that, it tells us that we are kind of sidelining ourselves from the future, effectively. It would be kind of like refusing to write about computers because we hadn't written about computers before and we didn't have any computer scientists writing science fiction. It's the same sort of bizarreness. We need to engage with it and we need to do more about it. But I don't have any easy answers. I just think everyone needs to realize that there's a problem and think about what it is they wish or wish not to do and what that says about them, and move forward from there. I think you can make a broad criticism of the genre like that, but trying to find individual things is best left to the individuals in question. However, I'm not going to stop being occasionally talking about this, and I'm not going to say I'm not a proponent because that's a dumb idea, but to me it seems sort of ridiculous to say I'm an outspoken proponent when I've blogged about it 4 times. It just seems to me a very self-obvious thing. Do I think I've made a difference? What kind of resistance to change have I witnessed? I have no idea if I've made a difference. I do know I've gotten a few books out there with protagonists who are not your usual protagonists. You know, sort of dreadlock Caribbean space opera is not something that's been commonly done before. So in terms of the reader feedback I get, that's profound for some readers. It's profound for some new writers starting out because they've realized that this can be done. And I've gotten some notes from writers who've mentioned that it's been very uplifting for them to see that this can be done, and that they are welcome in the genre to playing around in it. So that has been something. What kind of resistance to change have I witnessed? I'm in a really odd situation in that I'm a biracial dude who looks white, and I write about Caribbean characters and a wide range of characters. So resistance on my side, I don't know. It can be, for me, it comes from the fact that I'm a very confusing person who's sort of in the middle. I'm a shadow person. And as such, I get a lot of confusion from minorities and white people about who I am, what I'm trying to do. And I don't really sort of fit any easy equation. To be honest, it's been a lot easier since Barack Obama became president because he is someone who has the same sort of duality of identity. Only in his case, everyone wants to claim him. In my case, everyone's just sort of somewhat confused about me. So the resistance I've had is that people have not felt it easy to pigeonhole me or figure out where I'm coming from. You know, I'm a lot of people who support minority science fiction, want more magical realism or want more literary sort of science fiction. So the fact that I write pure adventure, unabashedly, confuses many and gets me blowback on that front. So I can't be easily categorized there. The fact that I look white and enjoy a tremendous amount of white privilege, to be honest, means that I'm confusing to some minority people in that regard. And then white people are often very confused that I identify so strongly with minority groups and with a minority background. But that's just because it was more about the way I was raised. And my actual identity is that, my father, if he were to be here in the States, would not be considered white. And so, of course, you gain a lot of identity from your parents, and so some of that comes down to me. On the other hand, my mom is British and very white, and I have that identity buried within me too. So I'm a very odd sort of person, and my refusal to pick either or, my happiness with sort of sitting in this sort of gray area means it's hard for me to market myself in some ways. It's hard for me to explain my story. It's hard for some people to understand it. But it's changing every year, and what I do have is a core group of people who get what I'm up to and appreciate what I'm about, and that's been really good. But yeah, it does give you sort of career problems when you get sort of a rejection back that says, like, well, he's a white-looking author who is writing about black characters and is from the Caribbean and writing pulp space opera that's full of explosions and adventure. We're not even sure how you engage with this or market it, and that kind of gets frustrating.
Can you tell us about some of your works in progress or in the planning stages, and are they different from the stories that you have in your Crystal Rain universe?
Well, I'm working on a new novel. It's called Arctic Rising, and part of that is because the space opera series has done okay for me, but not as well as my editor and I and my publisher are hoping. So we're hoping to try something new, maybe reboot things and see if we can hit the next level, which, since I pay most of my mortgage off of my novel writing, fiction writing, I'm completely down with. I've had a lot of fun writing a series of short stories based in the near future about technologies and political situations that are developing, and I'm very interested in near future ecology and some of the stuff that's happening. So Arctic Rising and the novel that's going to come after it are novels that basically I'm hoping to piss off people of liberal persuasion, people of conservative persuasion, sort of gather up my moderate posse and look at a sort of ecological catastrophe in the future that is life as usual and is very science fictional in its approach to these problems, but is kind of like a techno thriller. And so far it's been an absolute blast to write, and it's a lot of fun.
You write some nonfiction and a few blogs in addition to your fiction. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, I do some nonfiction. I do some copy. I'm involved in some marketing, online marketing weirdness that I can't really talk about. So some Web 2.0 stuff, and I work now for just one blog, but I used to work for several. And that is just sort of the freelancing side of the nature of being a full-time writer. What it does is it brings in guaranteed monthly income. See, when you're when you publish a novel, the royalties come every 6 months, and of course when you turn in a completed new novel and whatnot. And your foreign money, your foreign rights money or sub-rights money for novels comes in very infrequently. So sometimes you get stuff that comes in all in 1 month, and then you'll go several months without any money. And that makes it really hard to sort of budget and plan for stuff. So I do consulting, I do blogging, and I do editing, and I do marketing copy, and just stuff like that all throughout, so that there's always a monthly trickle of money. And to be honest, nonfiction right now actually pays a lot better than writing short fiction or fiction in general. You can make anywhere from 25 cents to $1 a word writing nonfiction, whereas the upper level of getting paid for fiction, particularly for short fiction, is like 25 cents a word, I think, at Bane's Universe, and is usually somewhere between 5 and 10 cents a word, which in nonfiction would be laughable. I can write the nonfiction a lot faster than I can write the fiction. So whenever I find and can score gigs for half $1 to $1 a word, that brings in good money on a quarterly basis, and that's what keeps keeps everything humming along smoothly. So there's always this sort of base level of income that I'm anticipating and expecting.
There's been a lot of talk in the speculative fiction community about the death of science fiction in the written form, or its lack of relevance. What do you think about that, and where do you see science fiction headed in the next decade or two?
The future of science fiction in written form. That's interesting. I'm kind of spreading my bets. I play a lot with a lot of different things, but I think, particularly with the internet, you take away the expense of having to create a magazine. You take away the expense of specialized typography and all that stuff. You're just down to an editor, a proofreader, and and a web designer. And with some of the content management systems, you only really need that designer once, and then you can kind of, update it maybe once every year, every couple of years, but you can push your content out. And so you need an editor and a freelancer basically to push out a magazine. So what we're seeing a lot more hobbyist situations. So I think written SF, short fiction, will always be sort of a hobbyist. There's always going to be at least a core hobbyist platform for it, whether or not the magazines, the big three, continue to survive. And I think, marketing groups, like whether it's publishers like Tor.com or other places who want to use it as sort of a loss leader to advertise the quality of their fiction, will continue to always support that. So I'm not too terribly worried about the death of written science fiction. As far as novels go, I mean, the Amazon Kindle e-readers kind of taking off. I still see books all around me. Kids are more interested in reading novels now than they were before. The Harry Potter effect, the Stephanie Meyer effect. So, 10 years ago, when I first started writing short stories, everyone was predicting the imminent death of the novel. And I think it's something that's always just around the corner of dying and somehow just continues limping along. And I think it'll be written for at least another 10 years, and I'm not too terribly worried about where it goes from there on. I assume it'll be written. One of the interesting things that Kevin Kelly at cooltools.com, who's often linked via Boing Boing and Cory Doctorow, points out is that old technologies never really die. You can still buy older forms. You can still buy industrial tools. These things never go away. So whether or not novels survive as the mass-produced item they are now, or they all go ebook, or whether it becomes more limited editions or something like that, I think it's always going to be around with us. It's not going to go anywhere. We still have oral storytelling, just as we did since the time of Homer. So it's something a lot of people get whipped up into a frenzy about. I'm not too terribly worried, but there you go.
Well, congratulations on becoming the father of twin girls. That's a wonderful experience to go through. How is it changing your writing, or is it still too early to tell?
Thank you very much. My two twins are healthy, hale, hearty, and been home for about 7 weeks now, and they're doing good. I don't know how it's changing me as a writer yet. Throughout all aspects of my life, everyone predicts how things are going to change me, and I think that's more a projection of other people's experiences than it is mine. I have a pretty solid core identity and set of goals and approaches to life that have stood me well, and most people who meet me know that I don't really change all that much. I've wanted to be a writer since I was 15. I sort of approach the world the same way I have for a long time as a result of having a very tough childhood. I had to mature very fast. So as far as how much they're changing my life, obviously I have a lot less free time, but it's easy enough to sacrifice watching TV to take care of that. I never really had much of a social life, wasn't much of a partier, so losing that aspect, I never had it to begin with. It's, we spend all Friday night hanging out with the kids, watching TV and making sure that their needs are met. And how that differs from a normal Friday night for me is that usually on a Friday night my wife and I would be watching TV, eating ice cream, so or I'd be reading or enjoying the latest movie. So it's really not that much different from life as it was before. As far as how it's changing my writing, they're only 7 weeks old. It's too soon to tell. Mainly I'm just trying to figure out the mechanics of how to write around their needs. I usually write from midnight to 5 or 6 a.m., so it's actually worked out really well. I take care of the kids really late at night so that my wife can sleep. And so in between when they're waking up and needing attention, I write. And basically life is settling back down to semblance of what it was before. I think my health issues in November and December, I had a pulmonary embolism, and recovering from that had more of an impact on my writing and my life in general. That brush with death and the forces you to sort of, take a look at your goal sets a little sooner than you normally would, and go through and look at all the cruft and think, this stuff is all meaningless. I need to focus on the big stuff. Maybe that would have happened if I'd had the kids and not the life-altering experience in November. And that had more of an impact on just my energy levels and everything. So, but having the kids now, I don't know if it's changed me too much.
I understand you have a short story collection in the works. When is it coming out, and where can we get a copy?
Yeah, I do have a short story collection coming out soon. It's actually already out by the time you would have seen this video. It's called Tides from the New Worlds, and it's from Worm Publishing, and that's WYRM Publishing. And what's cool about it is that's how I broke into the field. I have over 30 short stories published in various magazines and anthologies. And the weird thing about it is I never clicked with any one particular editor or magazine. So my short stories are spread out over multiple magazines, anthologies, websites, everything like that. And there's no one place where people have been able to go to see the full range of what I'm able to do and see all the different stories I've written. So being able to get them all into a single collection is kind of exciting. I'm pretty chuffed about that and looking forward to seeing more of the reaction people have from it. I'm very proud of it, very proud of it.
Tobias, thank you so much for appearing on the show. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Oh, well, thanks a lot for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. And till next time.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Tobias Buckell. He's a very interesting guy. So far I've been fairly lucky with getting some very interesting interviewees on this show, and I hope to continue bringing that sort of thing to you. And now it's time for our news segment. The International Astronomical Union has named a crater on Mars for the esteemed science fiction author Isaac Asimov, and I'm sure Asimov would be quite thrilled about that. Staying on the Mars thing, NASA has announced the next Martian rover's name will be Curiosity. It was named by a 12-year-old Clara Ma, who is a resident of Lenexa, Kansas. So congratulations, Clara, and Curiosity is a great name for such a device. Novy Mirror is to discuss SF interviews. Hey, who slipped that in here? Finally, last week, the first crew of the let me start that over again. Last week, the first crew without an American aboard has launched for the International Space Station. And when they join the astronauts and cosmonauts already aboard, it will mark the first time that all 5 agencies are represented in space at the same time. The member agencies are, of course, NASA, the Russian Space Agency, JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. So it's sort of a remarkable time in history. That's all I have for this time. I'll see you next time on the Novy Mirror. Bye-bye.
I don't want to sing no song. I don't want to sing no song. Where's my money?